The gunshot rang out inside the stone walls of the castle, and for one suspended moment Josslyn believed it was meant for her. She had already accepted the cold certainty of it while Cullum's finger tightened on the trigger and the proof she had risked everything to steal lay useless on the floor beside her. But Brennan moved faster than fear. He stepped into the line of fire without hesitation, and the bullet tore into him instead. His body hit the ground hard, and the sound echoed through the corridors like a verdict. Josslyn screamed his name as blood spread across his shirt, and in that instant, everything she thought she knew about Brennan shattered and rearranged itself into something far more dangerous and far more human. That moment became the axis on which everything turned, though neither of them understood it yet. Long before the castle and the gun and the blood, there had been manipulation, quiet, calculated, and disguised as mentorship. Brennan had entered Josslyn's life when she was still raw, from grief and anger, still trying to find a place in a world that never stopped demanding more from her. He had spoken to her as if she were capable of greatness, as if her instincts and courage were not flaws to be corrected, but weapons to be sharpened. She had felt seen and chosen, and that was the first hook. When Cyrus became the target, Brennan framed it as necessity and survival. He never said the word murder, and Josslyn never thought she would be capable of it until the night she was cornered and forced to act. She pulled the trigger to save herself, and Cyrus fell, and the world tilted. Brennan was there afterward, calm, steady, telling her she had done what she had to do. He told her the truth would destroy her, and he offered silence as protection. That silence became leverage, and the path into the WSB opened beneath her feet. Josslyn never fully understood how deep the manipulation went because Brennan never acted like a villain. He did not threaten her or gloat over her secrets. He guided her, trained her, and pushed her forward until being an agent felt less like a punishment and more like a calling. Years passed, and the secret of Cyrus faded into something buried so deep that even Josslyn stopped hearing its echo at night. Brennan never spoke of it again, and no one else ever did. To the world, Josslyn was a rising star within the WSB, a young operative with sharp instincts and a willingness to take risks. To Brennan, she was something else entirely, though even he might not have had the courage to name it. The line between professional duty and personal attachment blurred slowly. Brennan watched Josslyn with the quiet vigilance of someone who feared losing more than he could afford. He began to see Carly in her stubbornness and fire, and that resemblance unsettled him. Loving Carly had never been part of the plan yet. It happened all the same. Carly represented everything he had told himself he could not have: a normal life, a family, something pure and uncorrupted by secrets. Loving her made him question choices he had once believed were justified. Loving her daughter, even in the guarded, complicated way he allowed himself, made those questions impossible to ignore. When Cullum arrived in town, Brennan felt the danger coil tight around his chest. Cullum was not just a superior. He was rot at the core of the WSB, a man who sold protection to criminals and buried the bodies of those who stood in his way. Brennan had been gathering evidence quietly, patiently, waiting for the right moment to expose him. Cullum's presence meant that moment was coming, whether Brennan was ready or not. That was why Brennan told Josslyn to step away. He framed it as timing, as protocol, as concern for her safety. He asked her to resign from the WSB, at least temporarily, and he did not explain why. Josslyn heard the request as rejection. She heard it as doubt. After everything she had done, everything she had survived, he was pushing her out. At the same time, another truth slammed into her without warning. She discovered that Brennan was involved with her mother. The knowledge hit her like betrayal, layered on betrayal. She confronted nothing, and instead listened from the shadows when she should not have. She heard Brennan tell Cullum that Carly was a means to an end, that he was using her to get closer to Sonny. Josslyn did not know it was a lie, or perhaps a half-lie spoken to protect something far more fragile. She only knew that it confirmed every fear she had ever buried. The man she admired, trusted, and maybe loved was capable of cold calculation even when it came to her family. Trust fractured, and Josslyn made a decision that would put her directly in Cullum's sights. She chose to investigate alone. She convinced herself that Brennan could not be trusted and that the only way to protect her mother and expose the truth was to act without him. The castle became her target, a place rumored to hold records, transactions, proof of Cullum's corruption. Breaking in felt familiar, almost comforting. Risk had always been her language. But this time, she miscalculated. Cullum was waiting. He caught her red-handed and the mask slipped completely. There was no pretense of loyalty or shared purpose, only the cold certainty of a man who knew she was a liability. He did not threaten her with exposure. He planned to erase her. Brennan arrived because guilt has a way of sharpening intuition. He had felt Josslyn pulling away, had sensed the danger before he had proof of it. When he saw Cullum with a gun trained on her, everything else fell away. The years of manipulation, the lies, the secrets, the love he had tried to keep separate from his work collided into one undeniable truth. Josslyn did not deserve to pay for his choices. When Cullum fired, Brennan stepped forward without thinking and took the bullet meant for her. Pain exploded through him, and the world narrowed to the sound of Josslyn's voice calling his name. After the shots, everything became chaos. Cullum fled, knowing exposure was imminent. Josslyn pressed her hands against Brennan's wound, desperate and shaking, whispering apologies she did not fully understand yet. Brennan looked at her through the haze of pain and regret and saw not an asset, not a soldier, but a young woman he had failed and loved in equal measure. He told her to listen to him, to remember that none of this was her fault, even if he knew that absolution would not come easily. Sirens wailed in the distance as the truth began to surface piece by piece. Carly learned what had happened when she arrived at the hospital and saw Brennan bloodied and unconscious. The sight shattered her composure. She had spent weeks secretly aligning with Valentine, gathering her own suspicions about Brennan's motives, never imagining that he would be lying in a hospital bed because he saved her daughter. The realization cut deep. Guilt flooded her as she stood by Josslyn, who was still trembling, still replaying the moment when Brennan stepped in front of that bullet. Carly saw something change in her daughter's eyes, a shift from anger to something far more complicated. Admiration, grief, and the slow, painful understanding that heroes are flawed and love is rarely clean. As Brennan lay between consciousness and darkness, the future remained uncertain. Cullum was still at large, the WSB was on the brink of scandal, and the secrets that had bound Brennan and Josslyn together were beginning to surface whether they were ready or not. Josslyn sat at his bedside watching the steady rise and fall of his chest, and wondered how much of her life had been shaped by choices that were never truly hers. She wondered what it would mean to forgive him, and whether forgiveness would cost her more than anger ever had. Outside the room, Carly stood alone, wrestling with her own regrets, knowing that the man she had doubted had risked everything for her child. And somewhere in the city, Cullum was already planning his next move, leaving the question hanging heavy in the air whether Brennan's sacrifice would be enough to save them all, or whether it was only the beginning of a far darker reckoning. Brennan did not wake quickly, and the waiting stretched into hours that felt like years. Josslyn barely moved from the chair beside his bed, afraid that if she looked away even for a moment, he might disappear entirely. Machines hummed softly around him, and every sound seemed amplified by her fear. She replayed the memory of the gunshot again and again, seeing his body step in front of hers, feeling the weight of what he had done settle deep in her chest. For the first time since she had been pulled into the WSB, she allowed herself to consider that Brennan might have cared for her in a way that had nothing to do with strategy or control. Doctors finally spoke in careful, measured tones, explaining that the bullet had missed his heart by inches and that surgery had gone as well as could be expected. He would live, but recovery would be slow. Those words should have brought relief, yet Josslyn felt something else rise alongside it, responsibility. His injury was because of her choices just as much as his. That truth would not leave her alone. Carly watched her daughter from across the room and saw how deeply the experience had shaken her. Josslyn looked older somehow, as if a layer of innocence had been stripped away in a single night. Carly carried her own burden of guilt, knowing she had doubted Brennan had worked against him in secret with Valentine. She wondered how different things might have been if she had trusted her instincts instead of her fears. Standing there, she made a silent promise that if Brennan survived, she would hear the truth from him, no matter how painful it might be. When Brennan finally opened his eyes, the moment felt fragile and sacred. Josslyn leaned forward, her breath caught as he focused on her face. His voice was rough when he spoke her name, but the relief in it was unmistakable. He asked if she was safe before he asked anything else, and that question broke something open inside her. She told him Cullum had fled and that evidence had been recovered from the castle, enough to expose the corruption he had been hiding for years. Brennan closed his eyes at that, and a faint smile touched his lips, not of victory but of release. Their conversation afterward was halting and raw. Josslyn demanded the truth, not just about Cullum, but about everything. Brennan did not deflect this time. He admitted that he had manipulated events years ago, that he had used her fear and loyalty to push her into a corner where becoming an agent felt like the only way out. He told her that he had justified it by believing she was strong enough to survive it, and that the WSB needed someone like her. Saying it out loud stripped away any illusion that his actions had been noble. He apologized without qualifiers or excuses and accepted that she might never forgive him. Josslyn listened in silence, tears sliding down her face as she absorbed the weight of his confession. She told him that killing Cyrus had changed her in ways she had never been able to articulate, and that being an agent had often felt like living someone else's life. She admitted that part of her had admired him, even loved him in a complicated, tangled way, and that discovering his manipulation had felt like losing the ground beneath her feet. Yet she could not ignore the fact that he had taken a bullet for her without hesitation. That act did not erase the past, but it reshaped it. Outside the hospital, Cullum's world was collapsing quickly. The evidence Josslyn had uncovered, combined with Brennan's files, triggered investigations that spread far beyond Port Charles. WSB leadership moved to contain the fallout and distance the agency from Cullum's crimes. Arrest warrants were issued, and his allies began turning on one another. Cullum went into hiding, but his reach was shrinking by the hour. He was a dangerous man backed into a corner, and everyone knew it. Valentine approached Carly with information confirming Brennan's long-suspected innocence in the corruption scandal. Carly felt a complicated mix of vindication and shame. She ended her alliance with Valentine and focused instead on supporting her daughter and confronting Brennan when the time was right. When she finally stood at Brennan's bedside, their exchange was quiet and heavy with unspoken history. Brennan told her that his feelings for her had been real, that he had lied to Cullum to protect her and Josslyn both. Carly believed him because she had seen the proof written in blood. She thanked him for saving her daughter, and tears spilled freely as she did. As Brennan recovered, Josslyn faced her own reckoning with the WSB. She realized that staying would mean continuing a life built on secrets and compromises she was no longer willing to make. She informed her superiors of her decision to resign permanently, citing personal reasons they did not challenge. Too many eyes were on the agency, and they were eager to close chapters that invited scrutiny. Walking away was both terrifying and liberating. For the first time in years, her future felt uncertain in a way that belonged to her. Cullum made one final desperate move when he attempted to flee the country using forged documents and a private airstrip. Brennan, despite his injuries, insisted on helping coordinate the operation to capture him. Josslyn was not involved directly, but she followed every update, her nerves stretched thin. The arrest came swiftly and decisively. Cullum was taken into custody without further bloodshed, and his empire of corruption collapsed fully. The threat that had loomed over all of them was finally neutralized. In the aftermath, silence settled over Port Charles. Brennan was officially cleared, though his career with the WSB was effectively over. He accepted that outcome with a calm resignation. Power had cost him too much already. He chose instead to focus on healing and on rebuilding whatever pieces of his life were still salvageable. Josslyn visited him often, and their conversations grew easier, less burdened by anger and accusation. Trust returned slowly, not as blind faith, but as something earned moment by moment. One afternoon, as autumn light filtered through the window, Brennan told Josslyn that he saw her not as a subordinate or a weapon, but as someone he hoped would find a life untouched by the shadows he had lived in for so long. He told her that stepping in front of that bullet had been the simplest decision he had ever made, because protecting her felt right in a way nothing else ever had. Josslyn took his hand and told him that while the past could not be rewritten, it did not have to define what came next. She did not promise forgiveness, but she offered understanding and the chance to move forward. Carly watched this tentative reconciliation with cautious hope. She knew that healing would take time for all of them. She also knew that love, when tested by fire, often emerged, changed, but stronger. Her relationship with Brennan remained complicated, shaped by secrets and sacrifice, but grounded now in honesty. They agreed to take things slowly, allowing space for trust to rebuild without pressure or illusion. As winter approached, Josslyn made plans for a future outside the WSB. She returned to her studies, explored paths that had once seemed impossible while living as an agent. She felt lighter, freer, though the memories of what she had done and seen would always be part of her. Brennan encouraged her without trying to direct her choices, and that shift meant everything to her. On a quiet evening months later, they stood together overlooking the water, the city lights reflecting softly around them. Brennan moved carefully, still healing but stronger every day. Josslyn spoke about fear and choice and how saving someone could change the meaning of everything that came before it. Brennan listened, knowing that redemption was not a single act, but a series of them. He had begun that journey the night he stepped into the line of fire. The story that began with manipulation and secrecy found its end in truth and sacrifice. Brennan paid the price for his past, not through punishment alone, but through the humility of change. Josslyn reclaimed her life and her agency, choosing a future shaped by her own will. Carly learned that trust sometimes demands vulnerability, even when it risks heartbreak. And as the echoes of gunfire faded into memory, what remained was the quiet understanding that even in a world built on shadows, light could still break through when someone chose to stand in front of the darkness instead of letting it claim another soul.